Welcome to today's Partner Web Conference, Fast Track Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Enterprise Edition Tech Talk. Today's topic is data management. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Alejandro Gutierrez, Senior R&D Solution Architect. Alejandro, you now have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Today we are going to do an overview on what is data management and the different tools that we use to process data on any implementation. We have other tech talks that are more specific to, for example, integrations or configurations. Today's session is more about the general architecture and the different techniques that we can use and how we can combine them to get the best benefit of all these strategies and tools. We're going to do an overview about the data management scenarios, the typical scenarios that we handle in any implementations, talk a little bit about the data import-export framework, what we can do with database operations, how we can replicate data across legal entities, typically known as cross-company data sharing framework, the new functionality in Dynamics 365 to copy legal entities in a given environment, and also some recommendations on best practices. One of the important strategies on any implementation is how to handle data since the start of the implementations. And we can start any implementation using demo data, or maybe we can start with a blank database. But the important thing is how we can improve the process to manage this data and get quality at every step of the implementation. So combining these tools and making sure that we are using those properly, it's very important. One of the key scenarios that we handle is, for example, I can start getting data from a previous system just to create the initial demo data using customer data. Or maybe I can take a blank database, deploy an environment with a blank database, and start configuring in that environment. Or maybe I can copy data from previous templates or data packages from previous implementations that will help me, that have been shaped for a specific industry, and I adapt those to the specific requirements of the new customer, and from there start to configure. So there are different scenarios, and for all these scenarios, what to do and when to use the different tools is very important. Also, we need to keep in mind that there are different environments involved in this process. So setting the right environment planning of which environment will be used for example, for golden configurations is very important. This is, depending the size of the project, you will decide how many environments you will use. But how you are going to flow the data between one environment to another and making sure that which is the environment that contains the most accurate or basically the golden configurations, it's very important. And so that way also you can control who can manage that environment, who can provide access to that specific environment, and make sure that when you reach your go live, when you are ready to go live and you are ready to see the production environment, you get the best configuration available at this point. Now, there are three different strategies here that we can use for any implementation. One of them is, of course, we all know the data import-export framework. This is a framework that we started to use back in AX 2012, and we are continue investing on that framework heavily in Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. There is a big difference between the two because today it's basically the entry point for Dynamics in terms of data, and it uses the concept of data entities. In this framework, we have expanded also functionality like templates. Now we use it for more purposes, and I'm going to show you how. And also to copy new legal entities. This is the latest additions to this framework. In database operations, same thing. We can move databases from one environment to another, but there are different techniques here. Like, for example, the point-in-time restore that is applicable for the sandbox environment and production environment, but those are used on specific conditions. We keep investing on servicing database operations, for example, moving data from the Tier 1 environment, which is the demo environment or dev environment, to a sandbox. This is coming very soon, and this is new tooling that you will be able to access directly from LCS. Today, we already support moving data from sandbox to prod and with the specific service requests, and moving data from production to sandbox. Data sharing framework, that's another area of the system that is very powerful, but it's something that very few teams are already using. But also, we need to understand how it works and how to take advantage of that. The key here is how we can combine all these three different tools and strategies to get the best of the data management. And depending where you are in your implementation is the right tool that you should be thinking and considering to use. Let's talk about a little bit data import-export framework. This, like I mentioned previously, this framework is designed to handle all the data entry and exit of data in the system. Today we're going to focus more in the area of configurations and on how to handle import and export data. But this model basically is used for other purposes, like all the integrations, BI, or connecting mobile applications, or moving data back to Excel from Excel and exporting data to Excel and the other Office applications. Oh, why not? To connect a Power App as well. All of them uses a data entity. Just to summarize, what is a data entity? I think at this point many people know already about this, but let me just give you very high-level explanation what it is. In Ajax 2012, for example, we used to handle data in this way, directly on the tables. We needed to understand the relationship between all the tables, and when we were sitting any part of the system, it was very important to make sure that we were populating the system in the right sequence, understanding the technical aspect of all this. Now in Dynamics 365, we move away from this concept and we are only using data entities, which is a different way to see this, and it's a simple way, because basically we are encapsulating this rather than go to tables, we are going to a flat view of these tables, and the system will take care to populate all these tables behind the scenes. So for us, it's just a data entity that it's just columns, right? And something that we can understand easily, and we don't need all this technical background to move data. Of course, if we want to create new data entities, yes, we need to go and understand this part. But also we provide wizards and tools that can help you to create new data entities or extend the data entities. We look at this, how it looks like in the different strategies that we have been following. Well, I just explained data entities. It can handle different tables behind the scenes. It's an encapsulation. And we started early with an important number of data entities, and we keep investing on this, creating more and more data entities as we continue providing new releases. Today we have maybe more than 1,900 data entities for sure, but also for some previous releases, for the previous releases also, we started to create data packages back in previous application releases, and we created more than 250 data packages. Those standard data packages were designed to, okay, how you can take this big number of data entities and encapsulate those on a single package, because handling the entity by entity, it will not be actually productive on an implementation. And this is kind of one of the problems that sometimes we have on a project that, well, it takes time to use data entities. Projects mitigate that, reducing that, because you group those data entities by a specific functionality. The difference on the data package is that it contains the sequencing of all those data entities. So we just handle less files to load this data. But this is still a lot, right? 250 packages. Well, not necessarily on all the implementations we are going to use all those standard packages, but we have now templates. Templates were there since the start, but now we are using for more purposes. Like, for example, today we provide standard templates, which basically we reduce the number of data packages. So it's even easier to move those configurations with templates. The difference between the template and the data package is that the template doesn't have data. It's just the definition of the data package. So it's easier to move as well. All of these operations are being used in the data management workspace. And we can use this to couple legal entities, to use templates, to the export and import, and to configure the system. So this is our hub for data management in Dynamics 365. There is one important aspect, and I will demo more about these the templates and data package. But first, let me start with one implementation aspect of the data management, and this is something that it's very important to plan since the start. Typically, on any implementation, depending on practice, and we maybe as a partner, we can focus on a specific industry. We can be, let's say, we focus on manufacturing implementations. And we understand that industry, and this is our where our experience is. So every time that we go to a new project, many times we target those industry because this is where our know-how is. Well, that means that we understand how the data is being managed for those type of implementations, right? So why to start from zero? And for sure, maybe you have your configuration handbook and you have your secret book recipe, how to enable and configure. That's perfect. So then how we can leverage all those things? Well, we can also design all our data packages or templates that I'm going to explain with more detail how we can differentiate these two. But basically, we need to plan for those configurations for, let's say, that industry. And how we can start that? Yeah, maybe we offer these 200 or more 50 data packages, or today more than 27 templates. But that doesn't mean that you need to use only those. You can adapt those to your own practice. It means that you can modify the standard ones and create your own, or you can create your own from scratch. When you take those, let's say, if I take one of those data packages, I can go and extract, okay, those are all my data entities they are contained on that data package. But if I consolidate all of them, I can finish creating one single data package. And one data package can be converted to a template. So if I don't need the data, because this data package will contain data, but the template don't. They don't contain data. So that's the difference. That means that when I move from one implementation to another, I can have my collection of, let's say, data packages or templates. And I can go faster and configure a new project and just modify data that is specific for the customer. Sometimes it's possible to reuse data. For example, data connected to countries, currencies, well, or maybe other data that is so common across projects, we don't need to maybe modify that data and we leave it as is. But there are other that is specific to the customer, and before to load that data, well, that's the opportunity to do it. That way, that's another part that we don't need to go and invest all the time and say, okay, at least for the first data setting, we don't need to go and configure form by form. We can use this to quickly enable one environment, and from then we can do fine-tuning based on the different demos and testing that we do with the customer up to the point that we basically have a system that is configured. So it's very important that when you do this exercise, you plan for your configurations. And when I say that, it's plan for configurations that are in scope for the project, for this specific project, but also what you will do across legal entities. But there are more technical aspects behind it. For example, what data is being shared across legal entities by design. What I need to do I need to go and touch those forms? No. So that's why it's important to have this in the view. Let me show you an example. on how you could potentially do this work of planning. This is something that you can have your own method to do it, but this is to show you, well, if I have on a given project, yes, I can have all these data packages that are already created for my practice. And even in this example, I am using the standard data packages. Or if I select everything related, let's say for general ledger, I have a collection of different data packages, but not everything will be applicable for my project. In this project that I'm today implementing, and I can specify that. No, okay, I'm not interested in main account categories for this project. So when I'm configuring the first legal entity, I can flag everything that we believe is in the scope, and we can start from there. Also, we can specify what data will be moved across legal entities, because not all the legal entities will have the same functional scope, or maybe yes, maybe the master one will have. So that's another part where we need to be careful to plan for that. The next part is when, okay, what data is already shared by the system, meaning that when I say share, well, the system will populate across legal entities, but there will be data that is specific to that legal entity that I need to make sure that I consider for that. There are other two components of this. One of them is, well, I'm sharing data using the cross-company data sharing. Well, if I'm doing that, I need to keep in mind that and consider that. Or what data is specific for legal entities. There are some data entities that contains data that are connected to the legal entity. One example is ledger. So,
Alejandro, sorry to interrupt. Are you sharing your screen because we're not able to see your desktop?
Oh yeah, sorry. Let me check one thing quickly.
Thank you.
Is better now?
It's loading right now. Should be up in just a few seconds.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you.
So, okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Let me go quickly just on what I just explained. I just switched from the slide to one Excel file, and this Excel file contains an example of how you can plan for those configurations. This is something that I use to explain this, but you can have your own method on how to do it. And in this Excel file, I have the list of all the data packages that I have, let's say, for my practice. And when I move from project to project, I know what I will configure in. You can enable this in the system in some way, but in this case, I have control of what I want to configure across legal entity. And what I was explaining is, on every project, I basically define what is the scope for my main legal entity, what in terms of functionality, meaning what data I will be configuring. Typically, the data entity is connected to a form, so it will be easier to say, well, if I want to configure main account categories, maybe I will say, no, I don't want it, so it's not in the scope. It means that I can even remove this data entity from my data package, or just download data on that data entity, and the system will ignore this one, even if the design of your package contain it. Other is what you have in the scope for the new legal entities. And so you know that some functionality will not necessarily apply for the other legal entities. Or what data is shared by the system that by default, well, you need to make sure that you take care of the data connected to the legal entity, but it's already been shared, but you don't need to load it again if you don't have differences. The other component is what you are sharing with the cross-company data sharing. And in that one, it's important to make sure that we don't recreate data. And I'm going to show you how this cross-company data sharing framework works so that you can prevent to duplicate data when you are loading, and when you should be using that strategy. Let me go back to the slides. All right, so that's why it's very important to plan for the scope, and this is typically one of the areas where will avoid you a lot of back and forth between forms. And yes, we can have it on a handbook offline with how to configure accounts payable, receivable, general ledger, and so on. But the important thing is that you can do it also from the data entity point of view, from the data like in Excel that I just showed you. It's you can say, well, every time that I go into a project, how we start, what modules we will be targeting first, and what type of functionality we believe will be applicable. The other part is, as you go into the implementation, it's important that, let's say, you can run your project in iterations. Every iteration, you will find a new, let's say, configuration that you are tweaking. It's important you keep control of those changes because at some point, you want to extract the data or make sure that your whole environment is up to date. So we'll look at the process. Let's say once you have all this data, you want to, let's say, move your data from your, you were creating your first environment with the first configurations and you test those configurations. You want to extract those configurations and move it to, let's say, a golden environment. Well, the process is, yes, you create your export project in that environment. Once that export project will contain all the entities based on the packages that you had planned, or you can use the templates, and I will show you how to use the templates. But the important thing is you export, you extract the data, because again, that environment will have transactions. So you don't want to save the transaction, you want the configurations. So you export the configurations. Once you export the configurations, you move to the second environment, your target environment, which in this case can be the golden environment, and you import those. So that way you have the latest and greatest. Later, you will be able to move this data from this golden environment, perhaps moving a database or also using again a data package. So that's two techniques that you can use. The only difference between the two is that sometimes you want to move a specific data for specific models and not just the entire data. So that's one of the advantage and disadvantage between the database movement or the data package. Of course, data package, it will take you additional effort, but you have flexibility, what to move and in which section. When we are talking about a specific legal entity, that's different. That's inside the environment. Today we support only that part. Inside the environment we have a new model, a new section in the data import-export framework where you can take that data, select the target legal entity, and copy. And in that process you can also replace values. Remember the scenario that I was talking about, like the ledger, that we have the legal entity? Well, you can that tool will take care to convert that value from the original legal entity that is targeting, let's say, legal entity 1, and it will replace it to legal entity 2. And you can do it for all the legal entities. So this is also because it's very common to have more than one legal entities. This new addition is very, very helpful, and it will allow you to go faster in your implementations without removing all this overhead of repeating the same process. For the data templates. Data templates, like I mentioned, is like a data package without the data. And this can be used to basically to design new data packages inside of the system. The good thing about templates is that they have some tools. When you create a template, it has some capabilities to discover some dependencies, meaning that you can add randomly 10 data entities and the system will assist you to discover the dependencies. You still need to do fine-tuning and to test it, of course. It's not 100% proof, but it's a good high percentage of accuracy. So you can start from there if you are building your own data packages. Also, let's say in this scenario where you introduce 10 data entities, the system can help you to discover additional configurations that are connected to those data entities. For example, you introduce a data entity that is vendors. It's like if you didn't include vendor groups, the tool will help it. Okay, there is data and this is related to vendor groups. It's better that you include that vendor groups too. So that way you have the full package. So that's how you can build your own. And so these data templates, the good thing about this is that you don't need to start from scratch, meaning that we provide some standard data package, data templates now, and you can import those right in the application and from LCS. So if you were working on the concept of data package from previous releases, you can convert those, importing those into the template section and convert those into template. And from them, it's basically your configuration handbook, right? How to configure in general financials, or how to configure one single LE and 2 templates, which is possible. Let me just do a quick demo, and I'm going to switch the presentation to the application. So in the application, in the data management module, we have the templates tile. In the templates tile, yes, you can start from 0 and create your own. But also, you can import your templates, loading the default templates. When you load the default templates, and this is applicable for the latest releases, you can go and select what you want to include for this environment. These templates, again, does not have data, but it will allow you to convert this template into a data project and export. And you will see, in this case, I'm using a demo environment. And this can be the case when I basically, I had my testing environment where I have the first run of testing, and we confirm that everything related to general ledger has been tested. So we want to basically take that data out, and we want to move it to our golden environment. So at this point, I have all my templates of what we prescribe. You see, there are all the entities, and perhaps you have one customization in this section. So you can also add here your own data entity, your custom data entity, and here basically your new template will consider that as part of the design. So if I move back to the workspace for data management, I have all my templates, but I want to extract this data because I want to put it on my golden environment. So here I can say I will take a very simple scenario where I want to export data from this environment, and I have different options. I can do it again manually, adding all the entities, but well, I can have the challenge later that when I move to the target environment, the sequencing maybe will have some issues with. So if I do it here, I need to make sure that the sequencing is the same sequence that the system follows to load the data in the target environment. It means that we follow the business logic. But to avoid this, well, I go straight to the templates because I know those templates are being tested. And I just need to pick that template and export my data. I don't need to invest the time to figure out that sequencing. That sequence is already tested in the template. Same thing when you create your own templates. Well, again, the system will help you to test the sequencing, right? It will suggest the sequencing, but it's always important to validate. So you can either use the standard ones, the ones that we provide, or create your own templates. But if I go and export the data here, now I will get the data package, and that data package now contains data. I can move to the target environment and import it. Now, in this scenario, I am moving my configurations from one environment to another. And when I do my second iteration, and I have those templates designed for configurations, of course, I can do the same thing and export the data. And this environment will continue having transactions, but I am not interested on the transactions. I am interested on the configurations. And this can be the cycle. Let me go back to my slides. And it's when the database operations becomes handy, because, On my second, let's say I am in my, on my new phase, new iterations, new conference room pilots, or wherever you call it in your own practice, but your new phase in your project where you have, you will do a new run of testing. So sometimes you need to start again from zero, your blank database, because potentially you are testing fresh data migrations, and you need to make sure your configurations are up to date. You want to clean that environment, your sandbox environment. So for that scenario, the database will be blank, but you don't need to configure from zero. So you want to take all the configurations from the golden environment back to your sandbox. For that, you can use the database operations, moving the database from one environment to another. These database operations applies on different scenarios, meaning that it can come from your Tier 1 environment, which is your golden environment or development environment, your one box, single box environment, and move it with the backpack back to the sandbox. The good thing about this is that we are just about to release a new tool in LCS to allow you to do this faster, specifically to get the data into the sandbox. The process to export will be the same, but the process to import is the one that has been automated now in Sandbox, and we are just close to about to release that part. There are other things that you can do is, for example, moving from the Sandbox to production, and this is applicable especially when you are going live, and this is the only scenario when we allow that. Once you are live, you cannot move from Sandbox to prod, of course, because that environment is already live. Also, there is another service that you can move from production back to Sandbox. And this is good because when you want to have, once you are live, you want to have the latest and greatest data in Sandbox so you can do support resolution, or maybe you are working in new phases of the implementation. And there is also the point-in-time restore. That service is basically for environments that has a SQL Azure, which is the Sandbox and the production environment. For production environment, it's being used for very specific scenarios. Before going live, there is an option, and I want to show you how, but once you are live, it's totally connected to disaster recovery, and it requires a different procedure, like a support case and investigation and this type of thing. So, but today we are talking about the scope of implementing, and I will show you how you can use point-in-time restore even in production. How to access those services in LCS for in your project. Basically, you have a section for service requests, and in those service requests, you will see when you add a new service request, you have the option to select either database refresh request, which is the scenario where you are moving data from production back to Sandbox, database point-in-time restore, where it's applicable to Sandbox. And for production, it's different. It's for production. We handle it differently, especially if you are live. It's through support, and it's totally different scenario. And other requests, right now, there is the only way that we used to move it from a Sandbox to production. But this is continuously evolving. Like today, now, in this scenario, to import the database from the Tier 1 environment to Sandbox, the experience will be right in the environment. And in the environment, in the maintain sections, you will see the option to import database. So that it's a feature that very soon you will start to use. So under maintain, you will see this import database. This is not available now yet, but this is coming. All right. The data sharing framework. This is one of the sections of the system that it's like I mentioned, it's very powerful, but we need to understand how it works. And also we need to understand its limitations because it's not for everything. But let me explain how, in the general, what is the architecture. The data sharing framework, or the cross-company cross-company sharing, is basically, it works based on policies. When you create a policy, it means a collection of tables, fields, and the legal entity scope that you are targeting for that policy. Yes, it means that you can select series of tables, but from one table you don't not necessarily want to share everything. Maybe you can select some fields, not all the fields. And same thing with the legal entities. It does not apply to all the legal entities. You can select which legal entities are in the scope just for that table. So if you see, it requires some understanding also in the technical aspects. So that's why it's more technical configuration than functional. And this is not virtual company, because virtual company works more like a single record, and this data sharing is actually not sharing, it's data replication. It replicates the record across legal entities. One big difference from this to, for example, okay, why we use this and not couple legal entities, for example? Well, when we couple legal entities, that is something that I'm going to show you shortly. Basically, it's a one-time copy. It's not synchronization. This framework synchronizes. It means that once I move the data across legal entity, I also synchronize the data. It means that if I make a change on, let's say, I have two legal entities, I make a change in the second legal entity, the change will be reflected immediately in the first one, and back and forth. So it's real-time synchronization once you enable the policy. So it's very powerful for that purpose, and it can be, you can have more than one policy for one environment, and also you can transport these policies to a second environment using a data entity. We provide a data entity to export and import. In fact, what we do is we have two policies that we share by standard. Same thing, like we do with the data packages, and like we do with the templates that we offer as standard templates, we also do with the policies. There are a couple policies that we share for general ledger and supply chain, and those has been tested. You can create your own, but this requires some testing and validation and make sure that, yes, they are right. One thing that, let me take one scenario. If I have one policy where, yes, I can have several tables, but for those tables, I just want to pick two fields from that table. And I have three legal entities, and I can target just two legal entities. Once I enable that policy, what happens is the system will replicate the data to that second legal entity, and it will keep in synchronization that data between these two legal entities. It sounds like a powerful, right? But it has some limitations. And this is something that you need to keep in mind. This is not yet, oh, now I can go and share vendors or customers. Unfortunately, we have not reached that point yet. And we are working on a different solution for that. But this is more for tables connected to references, parameters, and group tables. So it's important that you keep in mind. But if you look at that, it's a high number of data. Even with that scope, you can cover a lot with that. So it's good to take a look on it and do some validation and see how you can use it for your own projects. The other part is that when you do it, we are not replacing the data, meaning if we have data in two legal entities, we don't go and replace the data. If we have two records with the same index, we don't replace one to another. The framework will tell you if there is a conflict and you need to resolve it. Let's take a look on it to see how this data, this functionality works. I have this environment. This section can be found in the configure cross-company data sharing. It's one single form that takes care of all these features. And here I have different policies that are the one that we share by standard. And those policies can be found in LCS. And if you go to the Share Asset Library, you can download those as a data package and import in your environment, and you can play with those. In the Share Asset Library, in the Data Package section, you will find not just the data sharing packages, but also you will find the templates if you don't want to consume it from the application, and some demo data packages, meaning, well, in this case are templates without data, but you still have the demo data. It's the equivalent to the template, but with the data. So all these assets are there for you. You can download it and consume it. Let's go back to this configure cross company. I will take one example for these payment terms. This is a standard policy, and I want to play a little bit with the terms of payment. That if you see, this is the functional term, but this is the technical term. This is a table name, basically. And that one, I want to share this against these two legal entities only. And this is, I'm using Contoso data, and I have more than several legal entities, but in this case, I want to target just these two. Once I enable this policy, I can find any issue that this sharing identify across these two legal entities only for this specific policy. And as you can see, it detected, for example, for this record that there is a difference on the description between the same record, but in these two legal entities. And the two legal entities are the ones that are in scope in my policy, at least for this specific record. Now, what to do here? It doesn't mean that the system went and overwrite the second one. No, it's asking you here what to do, right? Because you want to preserve one of them. And it's when you go here in update field value and decide which is the value that wins. And beyond that point, it will replace the value, and from there, it's just about to keep it in sync. So right now, it's beyond this point, I can use it. Let me take this, and I will do one exercise so you can see the experience of how fast this tool replicates the data. I will open this form for terms of payment. And for terms of payment, I will use, I'm in the USMF legal entity. I want to open exactly the same form, but I will switch the legal entity. And for this, I want to switch to USSI, which is my legal entity in scope for my policy. So I will pay with this record, with the cash record. Right now, it's actually the same record, right? Cash for USMF and cash for USMF. So I will take this one and I will want to modify. I will put different description. It can be any field that is in scope in the policy. This is when the fields becomes handy. Description is sharing that policy. So once I take this value and switch you to this one, I'm going to refresh this form, so it takes immediately the value from the other one. So it's that fast. So it's real-time, almost real-time synchronization, right? So you don't even notice the difference between the two. So think about in your implementations how this can apply for certain data. Yeah? And why this is important? Because when you start to populate data across legal entity, let's say you have a new legal entity, and you already implemented this feature, and you have the copy legal entity feature that I'm going to show you shortly. Well, maybe you should not consider this data entity anymore because the system is already taking care of that. But what if that new legal entity, we should not include it about that? Or maybe we decide to basically break the link. We don't want to share anymore. The good thing about this framework is that you can disable the policy. And the data will remain on the different legal entities. You will not lose the data. It will just disconnect the two. But of course, we don't want those scenarios. That should be a scenario that should be validated and tested during implementation. So that once you are live, this type of changes should be really planned, and you need to find the right time to do these type of things, and should be rehearsed and validated, because we don't want to mess with the data. So be cautious with this framework. This feature is very powerful. Yes, you can do a lot of things, but it requires some rehearsal. Now that I'm here, I will talk a little bit of the couple legal entity. And the couple legal entity is this new tile in the data management import and export framework. I was talking about in the data sharing about, well, what if we need to copy any legal entity? We do it here. And this is a very simple form that basically it's asking you, well, from this legal entity, which is my pivot, is the source. It can be my master legal entity. I can go and select any other legal entity that I want to copy data against. So I can do it here. But what if I have a new legal entity that does not exist? Yes, you can go and create the legal entity to the legal entity form, but also I can do it directly here in the form. So I can just create the code and move the data. And from there, you have different options at the bottom. If you see, the design is similar to the data when you export data. But here is you can add data entities that manually you can add a package as a sample to create the definition, but also you can add a template. And you can, if you have your master templates to new legal entities, you can go ahead and bring it. So, and that's the data that it will be moved from one legal entity to another. Of course, this also follows the rule of the sequencing, right? So, meaning that we want to follow a process to move data that keeps the integrity in the same way that we do it directly in the forms. It's the business logic. We don't jump from one form to another to configure. We follow an order. Same principle here. And it's the principle that you follow when you design your templates. All right. So the data sharing framework and the copy is important, but there are some things that, like you said, there are different tools that we can use, and we use those depending the time of the implementation and from which environment to depending the environment that we want to use. So all this requires some planning and some strategy, right? So, and this is typically a conversation that it's important that you have early in the project, so you know, okay, for this phase we are going to use the data in this way, and we're going to move from this environment to this environment using this tool. When we move to the second iteration, we are going to use this strategy, moving database operations, moving the database from Golden to Sandbox. When we are ready to go live, yes, we can move the database to production, but also we are going to use data packages coming from any environment. So all this, and also if you are using the cross-company data sharing, when it's important to apply, especially if you are creating new legal entities, you do it when you basically see the first master legal entity, and you enable this framework, these policies, and you just, after that, you just see the data that is only specific to that legal entity using the copy legal entity feature. So all this is a conversation that you need to have, and it's important that you keep in mind in data management. You will save a lot of time if you properly define these strategies in the start. And you know, this is something that can be repeated. Most of these techniques and tools can be reused in the same sequencing from one project to another. And that how your projects can go faster and with higher quality. And you focus on the part that you know the best, right? You know how to implement your industry, your customer part. And you use the tools to help you to reduce this overhead of moving data on a very random way many times, right? So combine all of them, use it properly in the right time, in the right sequence, and you will get a great benefit out of them. I'm going to talk I want to show you some example of how you can combine all these strategies. We talk about this golden environment, and yes, in this example that I'm about to show you, it can be either your sandbox, you're doing UAT, or it can be a go-live rehearsal. It can be your mock go-live, your last validation before going live. And yes, you can use production with certain restrictions for that, and we will guide you in the process. But let me tell you how. You take your data from your golden environment, and well, how you populated that golden environment, we just explained that, right? It can be using your data packages, or maybe you did some manual configuration. Hopefully, you are doing this mostly with packages, right? But once you have your golden environment, you export this data to your sandbox. Or in this case, production environment. And how you do it? With database operations. You move from that environment to, of course, you want to reach production, you need to pass first through sandbox and from sandbox to productions. We cannot go from tier 1 environments to production, but you need to use sandbox. But if in this case this is a scenario that I'm using production, you reach the production in that way. Once you load your data in production for golden configurations, you take note of that milestone. That's the first milestone, golden configurations in production. And when I say take note, you take note of the data and the time. And I'm going to explain you why. The next step is that you move all your master data. And also you can set your integrations, your endpoints. So you are already preparing your production environment for something that it will be actually the go-live execution. So it's the rehearsal for go-live. The next step is you take note of that milestone, of course, and you move all your beginning balances, everything related to GL and to AP, AR, inventory, and so on. So you can use those using your journals that, of course, use data entities. And once you reach that point, again, you have your new milestone and validate. After that, you can do some validation or testing, depending if you are in UAT. And you make sure, yes, integrations are working, data looks good, your master looks good. So, and you can run some transactions, system looks good. And also you can validate some kind of stability, yeah? That users are right, security roles are being set, and data migration sounds correct. So it's when at the end you finish your latest milestone in the mock cutover. In that part, you will take the decision. Okay, if you are in production in this scenario, you take the decision. What data can be rescued for all the things that we did? So which milestone is the one that we can go back? So we can say, well, opening balances, of course, no. We have our go live, and we want to see the latest and greatest beginning balances. Master data, maybe. If you don't have, let's say, new vendors or new customers, for example, you can, let's say, yes, all the data up to this point is good. And because you know the date and time, that means that we can request service for point-in-time restore. And we go back. Of course, we will validate that you are not live. So we do that, and we restore the data up to this point. So that means that everything that happened before that point is reusable. You don't need to spend the time doing the same thing again. This was a mock go live if we use the production environment. If this was in sandbox in UAT, yeah, maybe you can go back a little bit let's say to golden, that's fine. But the important point is that you can reuse, and you are actually using this environment to validate what will happen at the end. And you save a lot of time avoiding all this effort. And you just focus now in the cutover. So that means that the cutover phase is basically reduced. And many times these are very compressed time, that it's by the hour. But now you can have more time because you are reusing the previous effort, right? And you just focus on that part. Of course, once you are live and you have a phase implementation, the strategy changed totally. You cannot move databases anymore to production environment in this case. So you need to use data packages, or perhaps copy into new legal entities, because you are adding more legal entities. So as you can see, the investment on data packages is important. Not because we can build databases, we forget about those. And if we know in a given implementation that we are going to have new phases, new legal entities, it's better that we invest in that part too. So this shows you how you can combine the different techniques, the different tools, depending where you are in the project. And we have done this several times on several projects with high success. And the quality of the data has been high, much higher than we used to be without these tools. The important thing is when to use it and how to use it. And this is the purpose of this. There are more references that I'm sharing here with you about how to learn more about all these different tools and techniques. And also there are other different tech talks connected to data, as mentioned, like how to handle specifically the integrations, or more specifically about the moving configurations in regards of using demo data or the templates. So take a look at all of those and keep tuned with all the new features that we are adding to LCS. So that way you are up to date with the different ways to move data across the environment. I will open the channel for a couple questions. I think we are reaching the end.
Thank you, Alejandro. It doesn't look like there are any questions yet, but audience, if you do have a question, if you would just go ahead and click on the messages button at the bottom of your screen, type in your question into the white text box and click on send. Then Alejandro can get to your question. But before we do that, I'd like to take a moment and bring your attention to a link that I've added to the messages section as well. That's a link to a short survey for this web conference, and we ask that you please take a moment before logging out to access it. We hope that you found today's information helpful, and if you've enjoyed today's web conference or have feedback on how we can provide you with a better event, this is your chance to let us know. The survey scores are on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible. And Alejandro, it looks like there aren't any questions. Martin, are you seeing anything that needs to be addressed?
No, I'm not at this point.
Okay, perfect. Alejandro, did you have any final thoughts before we conclude the session?
I just wanted to say thank you, and also, like you said, it's important you provide feedback, and also in the tools and the processes that we are delivering to you. Those are intended to increase the quality and speed and stability of the implementations, and we are always open to hear from all of you on all this. So I appreciate your time, and thank you, and look forward to meet you on any other projects.
Excellent. Thank you. And audience, this does conclude today's web conference. You can access the web conference recording via the same registration link you used to attend today's live broadcast. I'd like to extend a thank you to our presenter, Alejandro, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us. Have a great day.